you ever heard it said that Jesus' sacrifice washed us clean? What does that even mean? That's what we're talking about today. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Coloring Through the Bible. My name is Keegan Harkins, and today we're talking about what it means to be saved, to be clean, to experience the joys of salvation. Now, whether you've been saved for 56 years or 5 minutes, this is something that we need to remember. We need to think about and not forget, and not heap on a bunch of legalism and rules and things that aren't a part of what it means to receive Christ, to be completely forgiven and saved and washed clean from everything from our past. When the New Testament writers were writing about what Jesus did, they often referred to it as being washed clean. And maybe that doesn't quite mean the same things for us as it did for them. So I thought it would be really important for us to get a perspective on this, to really understand the full depths of what this means. When we think of being unclean, you think, go wash your hands. Go take a shower, you stink, It's a simple fix. But back then, it was completely different. It was a completely different emphasis, and it meant so many more things, so many more devastating things to be unclean. To be unclean wasn't that you just needed to take a shower. It meant that you were completely an outcast. You couldn't hang out with your family. You couldn't have dinner with friends. You couldn't even walk through the streets of town unless you were constantly yelling out, "Unclean, unclean," because nobody could touch you. Nobody would be able to show mercy for you. No one would help you. They didn't even want to look at you. If they were a priest or a Levite or anybody super religious, their shadows couldn't even fall on you. This is what it meant to be unclean. They were cast out of the city. They were cast out of their families, out of their friendship circles, their jobs, made to live in extreme poverty and filth in the outskirts of town. They lived in unclean colonies. They could only associate with other unclean people. They had no access to coming to God. You couldn't step foot on the temple grounds, the courtyard, or anything if you were unclean. You definitely couldn't go in and have access to God because you weren't allowed in. You couldn't even get close. Only the high priest, only once a year, could go into the Holy of Holies, where he could communicate with God face to face. And he couldn't do it unless he was clean, pure, holy. So there was this huge distinction between where we all came from and where God is. And it wasn't even conceivable that the one could have any kind of relationship with the other, because there was this unimaginable chasm between the unclean and the holiness of God. And that's where Jesus comes in. And he didn't say, well, if you're sick, come to me and I'll make you better. Jesus said in Luke chapter 19:10, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." Jesus left heaven to come and find us. And think about being lost. Remember being a little kid and you're lost, you lose your mom and dad like in a store or something? Remember those feelings of what it was like to be lost. You're scared, you're alone, you're thinking about, the fact that maybe they didn't even care that you're gone, or they just left you there. You start to panic. You start to just, maybe even physically get sick because you're so scared because you're lost. And then you get to that point sometimes where you kind of try and make a new home. I remember being a kid and getting lost in a department store and going into the middle of a rack and just deciding, well, I'm just going to live here in the middle of this rack with all the clothes all around me. This is my little safe place. And I felt safe because I was hidden from view and people couldn't see that I was alone. And that's what we do when we've embraced sin. We create our own safe little place where we think it doesn't matter. It's like those unclean colonies that they had in ancient world, when you're just surrounded by other people that are just as sick as you are, or you've cloistered yourself off from the rest of the world so that you're just kind of comfortable with where you're at, because there's no one pointing out the fact that you're lost. There's no mirror pointing out how far diseased your spirit has become. You can just kind of create your own safe spot. And we would stay there if it was up to us. Because what we get comfortable with, what is familiar, we stay. We don't want to branch out. We don't want to know anything new because we're comfortable, we're safe. But you know what? Just like my mom didn't stop looking for me because she couldn't find me right away because I was hiding in the clothes, Jesus doesn't stop looking for us. And the great thing is he already knows where we're hiding. And so he seeks us, he finds us, and he washes us clean. You know, when you scrub your hands really, really good, have you ever just really, really scrubbed your hands and you kind of like scrub off all the layers of your skin, and the skin underneath is like pink and shiny and new? That's what Jesus does. Salvation is a simple message. Jesus left heaven and came to find us, to clean us. Not just so that we could have this label that says I'm a Christian, not so we can be invited into some secret little club of Christianity, but so that we could spend eternity with him, so that we could go into God's presence, because we couldn't go into God's presence because our sin kept us away. Now we can. Not because we are perfect or without sin, because I wish that was true. I wish that the second that we gave our lives to God, we never struggled with sin anymore. Wouldn't that be awesome? It's just not realistic. But because of Jesus' sacrifice, that's gone. We're not condemned for it anymore, and we can go into God's presence. It's important for us to remember that moment of our salvation. It isn't anything we did. And it's important to remember that God sought us out and loved us when we were his enemies. Because when we look at the world around us, we can be super judgmental. We can look at somebody who is just reveling in their sin and go, well, she deserves to go to hell. No. Jesus came for everybody. God loves everybody. And when he sees that person that you're just dismissing because you don't think that they're worth it, he sees his child who's lost. If you're a parent and your kid has ever gotten lost in a store or lost on their way home from school, you know that panic. You have to find them. Your life is going to just stop until you find them. It is heart-wrenching to know that your child is out there and they're lost. That's the way God feels about that person that we're just judging and saying, you don't deserve to go to heaven. Well, you know what? Neither do I. Neither do you. None of us deserve it. You know, it's like C.S. Lewis said, Christ died for men precisely because men are not worth dying for, to make them worth it. We aren't worthy of eternity in heaven, but because of Christ, he made us worthy of being in God's presence. So let's remember our salvation. Let's remember the simplicity of the gospel, because not only does it remind us of who we are, that we are so important that he stepped out of heaven to hunt us down, to make us new, but it'll also help us as we're looking at the world around us, that guess what? They're just that important as we are. So I hope this has been an encouragement to you guys. I love you guys. Until we see each other again, have a truly, truly blessed day.